the cloud. All right. Good morning, evening, midday. Many time zones represented here in the participants, I think. For me, it's Tuesday on a nice rainy 8 a.m. morning. We need that California rain. So thanks for joining. This is recording number 1. We'll do another one of these in a handful of hours. Our agenda is similar to what it usually is. We'll run through some metrics and some goal updates. There have been a couple issues that have been brought up recently that we want to flag, and then talking through the large data set process, a couple of reminders and some outstanding things there, and then time for an open discussion. But before we jump into that fun agenda, we have a new old face that we want to welcome back, our good friend K-Ray. So K-Ray, welcome. Take a second to say hi.
Oh, well, I will take you up on that. Thanks, Galen. My name's K-Ray. I've been with the foundation for about 8 days now. It's been nice to be here. Prior to coming onto the foundation, I worked at Protocol Labs. I have a very solid understanding of what's going on with the program as a whole, but I'll be joining to see if I could help out from just a support perspective, helping move things along, get a pace on what you need. I think if you just think from a how can I help you mindset, that's why I'm joining the team. So looking forward to meeting you guys more one-on-one as the days go by and the onboarding stops being like a fire hose, but just in sponge mode. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We are so stoked. And I think this is really going to make a huge, significant value add, both in how far we can go, how fast we can go, and how everyone feels along that journey. So very, very excited to have more supporting members on this cast of characters. So looking at some of our metrics, we pulled this snapshot yesterday, and there's a couple of things here that fill my heart with such deep, deep joy. Specifically looking at our average time to data cap right now, we're seeing it at 2 days and 18 minutes. And our average time to data cap in the past 30 days is a whopping 1 day, 16 hours. So this is great. So we're starting to see that it looks like the changes that we are making really are making a difference, having an impact on decreasing that time to data cap, which from a lot of the things that we hear from clients feels like a strong direction to go for that more seamless onboarding experience. Even if it's that first smaller tranche of data cap, it's enough to get them started and get onto the network. From there, we're still seeing overall average with direct notaries at 11 days. In the past 30 days, that is an improvement down to 9. We want to keep coming up with ways to drive that down. Specifically, we think that one of those is faster response time. So wondering ways to get better notifications, what kind of tooling we could make. We have some ideas around that, but we'd love to hear some more. And then looking at kind of our data cap funnel for our direct clients, we've gotten 2.2 PIBs to those clients, which is about 28% of what has been awarded to that active pool of notaries. Pretty good. We're still kind of looking at a January election cycle. So if you're sort of thinking out how much data cap you have as a notary, that's kind of where we're looking for those top ups. And then how that's flowing from those clients to the deals, we are seeing about 760 tebibytes. Looking at our LDNs, we've gotten about 3.3 to the clients, which feels like a small percent in comparison, but again, it's sort of just a different flow of when we create that notary with something like 5 pebibytes that is kind of reserved up at the top and then trickles out over time. But that said, from the amount going to clients into deals, we're seeing a pretty quick throughput. So very happy about those metrics. Looking at our direct notary activity, I'm going to pass this one to Deep, let him take it away here.
Cool. So continuing to benefit from the work that was originally done by the textile team, hoping to eventually replace this with a Notary leaderboard grant thing that we talked about in previous governance calls that I'll be partnering on with K-Ray and the rest of you folks that are interested in helping build something out like this. In general, I mean, the amount of content coming in continues to be at a pretty steady rate. Solid response rates, solid, due diligence processes resulting in not just everybody getting data cap automatically, which is fantastic. I know Andrew and Anya are in this call, so I do have a quick question for you, which is a bit of a segue. I noticed that the table itself is an aggregation of every GitHub account that's ever been assigned an issue. And so I actually PR'd this to try and get rid of some of the names that were only there for testing purposes, like I am Super Mario. And I'm on this table as well because I tested some stuff by assigning it to myself. And so what I want to know was, whenever you get the chance to look at the PR, not an urgent thing, I literally did this yesterday, but based on whether or not I did it right, I'd love to just write up like a line or two of docs as well on if that was correct, or ask you to do that so other folks can fall in line and adjust if they have changes. And then accordingly, for the team that's running the verifier like list, because we have like a list in the backend that's driving the app, the integration between the app and GitHub, they can probably consolidate and snap to this as well. And so we have a consistent like mapping of what is who for each notary, what is their identity on like the Filecoin Slack, what is their identity on GitHub, and then their preferred like contact method or whatever. Sweet. No major surprises or changes on this one. I think like in general things are pretty consistent. And I see in chat from Andrew, if they can publish a JSON or CSV, we can put it in. Okay, even better. We already have a JSON actually. That's how we're structuring it in the backend for the app. So maybe let's chat about this one offline. Yeah, we can get a thread going somewhere. And I guess, Andrew, are you the right person to ping on this, or should we coordinate with Anya or somebody else? Go with Anya. Yes, from what I understand, she is the Notary Pro. So we'll keep Anya in the loop. Yep, makes sense. Awesome. Let's go to the next slide. Sweet. So recapping on progress that we're making towards the general like Q1 sort of March. I keep forgetting to update the title. Again, we should really remember to do that in the template. The 6 month thing. Yeah, I know. Every time this comes up is like a joke, and then we forget to do it. But yeah, we're making good progress, at least on the first one, which is just trying to get more data cap out there. So I ran some numbers yesterday. Basically, how I calculated the LDN data cap was I took every LDN that had given data cap to its project effectively and summed up all their max like allocation. So whatever the number was between 0 and 5. And then every LDN that had already given an allocation and may have been ready for a second or third allocation and added that to it as well. And so if you want to replicate my math, you would go to the large data sets repo. You would sort issues by label approved, which are granted, actually state granted, which means they've already received some data cap, and sum up all of those. And then you could do state ready to sign, which includes both the set that have never received data cap and the set that are applying for their second, third, fourth allocation. And then I manually went through those and checked for the ones that have versus are still going through due diligence or waiting for notaries to sign. And that's how I got to about 75 petabytes, which is like, massive. Like a month ago, we were like in the 30s and the 40s. And a month before that, we were talking like 15. So I think like it's pretty awesome to see good growth there. We steady progress towards 3 digits, which is fantastic. I think it'll be a big milestone for us to say that, in general, data cap is not the blocker. There is data cap in abundance available for clients that are worthy of receiving it. Clients doing the work, talking about their projects, doing the KYC that's necessary, should be successful in the system and receive that sort of low friction onboarding path that we want to build out via Filecoin Plus. Second up on TTD, my favorite metric, talking about how long it actually takes to get data cap out to a client. And so this one, I sort of steady stated in the last month. We're still hovering around the same numbers. I think we've got a long ways to go on this. We have one open discussion that's been out for about 3 governance calls on like increasing automated verifiers to much higher numbers. And in general, it seems like we're getting good support for it. So I might promote that one into like an actual proposal then, since I started that discussion. And so by way of the governance process, I'll probably take it from being a discussion into an actual issue, and then loop in the folks that run verify.glyph.io to see if that's something they're interested in doing, or if we need to go via a different path to create an automated notary or something. I think that should help with that 0 to 1 terabyte range specifically. But I think there's the 1 to 100 terabyte thing as well, where that's the more manual verification path that's required. I'd love to get some conversation going, like especially now that we've got K-Ray here too, who's been deep diving into the general notary experience in Filecoin Plus. Would love to get, from the notaries that are here today, like what are things that could exist in the system that would make your due diligence turnaround time lower, or your due diligence burden like easier to handle. So specifically, I don't think we need to compromise on due diligence. I don't want that to be like an outcome from what I'm saying, but I would love to hear if there's like tooling that could exist, or like software that could be written that like provides you the data that you'd want to look at, so that instead of needing to spend several minutes or hours with each client, you go down to spending seconds, or it can review things much quickly, especially in cases where it's likely a good client. So yeah, maybe I'll go quiet for a minute and see if anybody has any ideas immediately. We can take a look at the chat and see if folks have prompts or thoughts for ways in which we can improve your process with support, not replace it, just like augment it. Yeah. The question from Faye in the chat. I know new notary application is on hold right now. Maybe consider some notaries for LDN only. That's interesting. So Faye, basically you're saying instead of waiting for an entire like notary election cycle, maybe we just start taking notaries that can participate on the LDN front without getting individual allocation. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's just I think notaries are quite busy right now. I think sometimes the response time could be improved if we have a bit more notaries on the LDN side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because they got lots of small applications on the regular data cap side, so they can get busy.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting, right? In terms of like how we think about notary status and notary like role evolving. And like I know she's not here in this call. She'll be in the afternoon one, but she's brought up the point of generally like looking at different levels of engagement. Maybe this is an opportunity to draw that distinction as well and say, hey, like you want to participate in LDNs, or you also want to do manual verification, because theoretically one of those is lower lift than the other, because with LDNs, even though you still have to do arguably the same amount of due diligence, you just do it less frequently because those apps are being shared across multiple notaries. And so that could be an interesting way of providing a path for that notary, which is kind of awesome. What are your thoughts on that, others? Or in general, I guess, if there's anything else we could do from a tooling standpoint. Okay, I'm gonna take that 30 seconds of silence as people thinking extremely hard and really excited to share their ideas on GitHub and Slack. And I think we should keep moving. Cool. This slide largely unchanged from last time. I actually don't want to spend too much time on this because I think we're better off keeping some time for discussions at the end. But in general, 3 core focus areas, in addition to the TTD and data cap abundance, are risk mitigation in the system, improving the client onboarding UX, and general improvement of the Filecoin Plus governance processes. These are meant to also serve as prompts for your thinking, like ways in which you'd like to contribute to the program and ways in which you think we can improve things. Thinking of them as like which one of these general focus areas or goal areas ideas accrue towards is helpful for framing and prioritizing within the community. So I think I'm going to leave it at that for today, at least, and then let's see if folks have specific thoughts on these areas or ideas that they want to get into execution. Back to you, sir.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have time in a second for open discussion. So any thoughts that come up around, like people saying, around these risk mitigation, client onboarding, and governance, love to hear more. A couple things that have popped up recently, just want to flag for the community. A sort of a bug issue with the amount of like data cap remaining in some of the places where we're calculating it. So most of you are aware that there was a recent network update. This has had a cascading impact on a variety of people. Some of their nodes may or may not have been updated to the most recent version. Some different API endpoints have changed. So specifically, as of right now on our dashboard, some of the values are incorrect. We're expecting a shift change today or tomorrow that will correct this. But where this is predominantly showing up is on the interplanetary dashboard. The remaining data cap value is not correct. The other statistics like data cap allocated, times to data cap, values of data cap overall, those to the best of our knowledge are correct. It's just the data cap remaining that was coming from a certain array endpoint that is no longer up to date. That had an impact on the bot that we were using to kick off subsequent allocations for LDNs. This impacted a number of people. I think Andrew and Anya on the textile team felt the impact of this over the last week. That bot had been trying to look to the dashboard to see how much data cap remained. Because it was not pulling the correct amount, the bot was not kicking off the subsequent allocation. That has been changed. So that API is now updated and corrected. The subsequent allocation bot should be successfully looking at the amount of remaining data cap and kicking off those allocations appropriately. So that's an update there. The bot, to our knowledge, is working, and those dashboard values should be updated by the end of the week. But just wanted to bring that up. Then I want to shift gears into this thing that we've talked about a number of times and just try and like go over this again, because we've heard from a number of notaries that there is still some confusion. We've heard from clients that there is still some slowdown. So the LDN V2 process that was proposed and accepted in issue 217 goes as such. From the front, there is a lot of work by the governance team and the root key holders before the notaries need to take action. Walking through the process step by step, a client will submit an application. The governance team and the bots will check for just basic completion. We look for things like, is this a duplicate submission? Are all of the answers filled out? That's all we're checking, really. Then we work with the root key holders to actually create the multi-sig notary. So there's an amount of back and forth processing. Some of this is automated. And what we come up with is then a multi-sig notary with an amount of data cap, with a weekly amount that we expect to use, with all, I think it's 23 active notary addresses on that multi-sig. Once that clears the root key holders and that multi-sig is on the verified registry, the bot then kicks off the first allocation and changes the labels to bot ready to sign so that it now shows up in the app. So all of this prep work is happening, and we're tracking now. We have some various API ways that we're tracking this time, and we're going to start publishing how much time it goes between each of these changes to look at where the slowdowns are. This before was taking months. We're now looking more like a week to go from a client submitting an application to the first allocation being started. That's the prep work. Then the notaries can jump in and start to action and do diligence these client applications. So as a notary, you may start at the app, signing in as a notary and looking at the large requests. I think right now there's something like 18 showing up in the app. Or you may start in GitHub, searching open issues of that large data set repo with the label bot ready to sign. Either are valid starting points, either are going to get you to the same place. At that time, the expectation for the notary is to review the client application and any of their past deal-making behavior. Is this a real client? Is this real data that meets our current standards? Is the amount of data cap that they are requesting appropriate? Is there past deal-making behavior that we think would be questionable or suspicious, such as a violation of their application terms? And this would be a time for you to ask any of those questions and flag for the community, or to sign the allocation in the app. If you have questions, feel free to ask that as a comment and tag myself, Deep, K-Ray, and we could change the label. If you think that it warrants it, we can change the label to needs review. Or actually, I think there's a different one that we're using. Sorry, I'll have to go check exactly which label we're using. But that will take it out of the app so that other people won't sign it until we get some back and forth with the client themselves to answer your questions to your satisfaction. If you're comfortable, we encourage you to go sign the allocation. And we're trying to kind of bias towards maybe signing a first allocation for a smaller amount of data cap, and then let the client start making deals. And then before the second allocation, maybe we could ask some more follow-up questions. Maybe when they go to make the second allocation, we can see, was their deal-making behavior up to what they said in the application itself, or is there something suspicious happening? Maybe a first allocation is a safe enough starting point to get more information. Right now, there is a process expectation that is not hard-coded, but it is just a standard that we are working towards, where ideally an individual notary should not sign 2 allocations in a row for the same client. So for example, when textiles allocation comes up, they're ready for their first set, Danny could sign that first allocation. They get a second signature from Rears, runs through that allocation, they're ready for their next allocation of data cap. Ideally, Danny and Rears don't sign that allocation. 2 other notaries jump in. Danny and Rears could sign the third one. Danny could go sign any of the other open 18 large data sets. We want to do this to try and let other notaries have a chance of looking at these different deals or different client applications and seeing, is there maybe something that another notary missed? It also just helps distribute that load. So if you have signed one, maybe go sign another instead of signing 2, the same one twice in a row. So like I said, right now, it's either 18 or 19. One of them may have actually cleared last night or this morning and shifted it, but you can see we have a number of allocations for a variety of sizes with an audit trail to investigate. And this is where we want you to jump in, either sign or ask those questions, or both. Sign it and say, I went ahead and improved this and I have some questions about it. So hearing from Faye, like the comment, the process is indeed much faster. That's great. That's exactly like, as a client with, Faye now I think has 1 LDN that has closed, 2 other LDNs that are in flight. That's what we're trying to do. Is get more of these deals flowing faster through the network and onboarding more of this like valuable data. It's like part of what we all want to see happen. So before we move to the next section, I want to like call out a couple of things to like note. There is no longer a lead notary role on an LDN. This was something that we had in the previous process when there were 7 notaries only. We would ask for there to be a lead notary to take charge. When all 23 are the notaries, everyone is equally responsible. There's no lead notary per client. It's not a current part of the process. The threshold is 2. Threshold before was 4. This is a significant change. We only need 2 notaries to jump in, 1 proposal and 1 approval for that data cap allocation to push through. There have been a couple of places where this has caused a slight issue, and we're working on ways to like better catch this, change our tooling, but just wanted to like call it out. Sometimes the bot and the app labeling doesn't catch that threshold of 2 has been met. And in that situation, the label may not be removed. What may also happen is 3 notaries may all jump in really close together and all try and sign around the same time. And what can happen there is the first notary could propose an allocation, message, transaction. The second notary would approve that. It hits the threshold, that message clears, that allocation lands with the client. That third notary that jumped in right after those 2, could be 30 seconds, would kick off a new transaction ID for a new allocation amount. We may then go in and remove the label, and there's now a floating proposed transaction ID for an amount of data cap. When that label goes back on and it shows up in the app again, that next signature, that 4th signature, would clear that other transaction ID. So again, I think this is what happened with Textile most recently. Not the end of the world. We're working on some ways to fix it. It's still significantly faster than the previous process, with only 7 available signers and a threshold of 4. So we think that the trade-off here of speed, where we run into some of these situations where we move maybe a little too fast and we get this next transaction, at the scale of data cap that we're talking about, this is still safe enough to try. This is not, in our opinion, a big threat or risk to the network. So other things to note here, we have seen and heard from other people that sometimes the app can be slow. This is because the message has to land on chain. So it can take over 30 seconds sometimes from when you start to send a message for that approval indicator to happen. Again, we're working on some tooling things, but you'll see some of those cycling dots letting you know that that page is still running. You can also open the console in your web browser for whatever you're using, and you can watch that message get built and then watch for it to update with either an error message or a success message. You can refresh the app once you have seen one of those messages or it has been a minute, and you can also go to the GitHub issue and refresh the GitHub issue and see if that message has landed. So there's a variety of ways to check whether that message has gone through. And the last thing that I'll note is with these new process changes, our documentation in a couple of places is out of date. This is a work in progress. We've been trying to get to it. It hasn't been the highest priority. We understand that it leads to some confusion. This is something that we're also happy to help crowdsource to the community. These GitHub repos are open. There are places where people can comment, submit PRs, let us know, point out an error, point out some out-of-date stuff, propose some copy to update it, and we're happy to share that burden. So pausing here before we go into open discussion, I wanted to see if there were people on the call that had questions about this large data set process, either from the front, the governance part, the middle, the notary diligence, or any of these notes that I called out. I don't see any hands.
Just one small question.
Yeah.
So when is the documentation expected to be done?
That's a great question. It's, it's one of the things that we've mentioned in our updates with the client onboarding experience is to, have better documentation. So hopefully within the next month, we will have some overhaul. It may be a slow trickle, it may be a big launch of a bunch of new documentation. We'll just see. But
Okay.
again, we're happy to get support. Okay, last thing I'm going to say about LDNs. If you're a notary and you're on this call, go check some out. Sign some of those LDNs. Shifting gears here to, we have these still outstanding notary governance discussions. We've touched on these a lot. Going to pause here and see if anything had come up recently on these specific discussions. Deep had mentioned the automated verification increase. Any comments or questions from the room about one of these or all of them?
So I have something to add, I guess, that's not on the screenshot because actually somebody made a new discussion topic this morning and then pinged me about it about 30 minutes ago. So I figured I'd flag it in the conversation today. It's very exciting. You Kaylin. Maybe it's worth just going to the live discussion page and we can talk about it if you don't mind. Pull it up. Notary governance. Let me know if you don't see it. Click. Yeah. So it's actually the here that you want to click on in the link. Effectively, Jenny Juju has created a FIP about some topics that we've often talked about, specifically around data cap ownership once it gets to the client. So today, functionality is limited for notaries to either add or remove, and then for root key holders to set basically data cap available to notaries. But once it gets given to a client, it's just with that client address forever until it gets used in deals. And so this is about basically saying, well, that client should be able to transfer data cap among the addresses and introduces an interesting idea, around like if somebody's using Textiles Bidbot or using Estuary as an intermediary or a deal broker, can they transfer that data cap to the intermediary instead? So that I don't yet have a strong opinion, but it is an interesting point where it's like, oh, like what is the ownership of data cap to a client and like what rights do they have about moving it around? Like what happens if they lose an address or want to transition to a different address? And then there's like the whole like remove data cap from a client, which could be inactivity, it could be actual issues for like malicious data cap usage and things like that. But generally providing a mechanism whereby data cap can be returned from a client back to the system or back to the notary that granted it or otherwise. This is especially interesting on the LDN front too, as we start to give out bigger and bigger tranches of data cap. How do we continue to earn confidence and let clients thrive in the confidence that they have earned versus have consequences for not being honest within the system, etc. And so in general, I think this is not controversial, not really surprising for anybody that's in this call. It's like stuff we've been talking about for a while. So I think it makes sense. I'm glad that Jenny Juju was able to drop this up. I don't think she's on the call right now, but it might be good to just spend a few minutes chatting about this as well, to see what people's reactions are. And I think there's still a couple of open questions called out, like how do we actually, like what is the mechanism by which these things happen? Who's allowed to do what are the bounds, what are the controls? And so I think we as a community need to spend plenty of time talking about it. And so we may as well start now. But yeah, if anybody has immediate reactions, please feel free to interject. If not, I think there's an order of questions that we could make our way through as part of a more structured discussion, if that's preferred.
So for the first one, the transfer data cap, so like we should avoid like for these clients to, I mean, selling their data cap through this mechanism, right? So if we can just have a mention that to have some like S3 to like they have some these kind of requirements. So if we could have some kind of whitelist, then we actually don't have to do to approve that, right? Just to let them to transfer data cap to S3 or
Right. So
something
you
like
have like
that.
a deal broker. If you have like a set of
So yeah, as long as
brokers.
there is a whitelist, we don't have to act on that. Like they can just do it by themselves. If
Yeah, I
that's
think
the
that's a really good
situation.
point.
Yeah, I mean, the core is to avoid them to sell the data cap. So
That makes sense. I'm gonna take a couple of notes here and then add it in into the issue later. Anything else? Any other thoughts?
Faye had a comment as well. I think he's posted and has already posted it because he's a rock star and on top of this. But rather than transferring all remaining, being able to specify an amount of data cap to transfer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have curiosities around how this would work for tracking and auditing in our dashboards, but that's just kind of a tooling reactive question. It's less of a strategic philosophical question.
Yeah, I think it would make things a little bit more complicated, but it's possible to track. I do think it makes an interesting challenge with, like, for example, if we do believe, like, previously my opinion was that, like, I would love to hear Anya and Andrew's thoughts too. Previously, my opinion was sort of Estuary and Bidbot, for example, they have knowledge, like disproportionate knowledge about who their clients are, right? They know who they're working with. And so giving them data cap or like having data cap being transitioned to them, to me, actually doesn't sound that right. Like I would almost argue that we should find ways for these software services that are enabling client onboarding to Filecoin and have high degree of confidence that the data being onboarded is accurate and good to actually just become notaries. That would make a lot more sense to me, where like instead of having clients like allocate transfer data back and forth between addresses, you just make that deal broker a notary. That deal broker then knows where to send the data cap. Like they know whether or not that data cap has to go to a specific client address or to a shared address, etc. And so that's like one of the thoughts I have. It's not a super strongly held opinion. I think we're still learning. But yeah, what do people think of that?
Andrew, would you like to take this one or what's up?
Yeah, sure. I'm kind of leaning with what Deep just said. It seems like this use case seems a little tricky. Like I'm trying to think of like who it's solving for. And like if I was a client and I applied and then I wanted to transfer my data cap, means either I applied prematurely and didn't quite know how to use the data cap, which is fine, no big deal. Maybe you should burn the data cap. Or I applied with the intention to give a broker more data cap, but that doesn't seem like the right way necessarily for the broker to do it. Like the broker should be vetting the clients. Yeah, I mean, I guess, okay. Sorry, I'm just thinking out loud here. I guess one idea here is that it takes the burden off the broker. So we could just stop applying for data caps generally and stop vetting clients and just tell the clients to go get vetted themselves via notaries. So that's beneficial. But that also sounds a lot like the large data cap process is a little broken. if brokers can't use the large data cap process to onboard more clients through their system. So yeah, a little bit of a conflict there. I don't know. I'd like to see like some concrete users for this before you spend too much engineering time making it real.
Yeah. I think that's a
Yeah.
valid offer.
Yeah, I think that again, philosophically, the question of like, should we build a tooling ability to transfer data cap from client address to client address is one question. And then thinking of like, well, why do we need this tool of this use case of going to a broker? I feel like the argument of this use case invalidates our sort of philosophy that data cap should be readily available and abundant and not a scarce resource. And that by saying you would want to transfer this to another entity to use in your stead is again, to like Andrew's point, that the broker then there's something not functioning with how the broker is able to do their role in their service. And either, again, to Andrew's point, like we're either going to shift it to say, well, okay, well then now the brokers just aren't going to do that, and it's going to go only to clients, and then that is going to become a bigger process, or the brokers are just going to do it. I think that there's a bigger question around like, what are the other use cases where this might be valid, of a legitimate client who loses access to an address but would need to transfer it. But again, my question there is, shouldn't they just be able to easily apply for more and say, I'm going to claim this address, you know, that used to be this one, I didn't make any deals, please send it here instead. And it should be readily available and abundant. So I feel like the more I think about this idea of transferring from client to client, the less I like it as a tool, in the instance that I would rather just have more small faucets of data cap where any client address could go get another sample amount for whatever reason, and could move forward without the need to transfer it to another client. Because the only other use case that I could think of is the act of selling that data cap, which is something we fundamentally don't want to support or allow. That goes to like this other idea of removing a verified client, which I feel much more strongly about, and have, you know, I think that there's a lot of like great, interesting things here around this idea of like expirations of data cap that which could then also get into some other ideas that we've talked about and had of like, what does it look like for data cap to flow back through the funnel in various ways? So if data cap is not used by a client, maybe it starts to degrade, their diligence is no longer as valid over time. But then looking at the flip side of that, if they use it quickly and then that deal expires, like that deal meets completion without any flags or issues, what would it look like for that client to get some portion of that data cap back in kind of this flow? And similarly, what would it look like for a notary to top up their allocation, you know, when a client successfully has used or removed that? So I think I'm like more interested in, you know, what are the mechanisms we want to remove a verified client and remove their amount of data cap? And then also, what are the ways that we want to think about data cap flowing back through the system? Or maybe we don't, maybe we only want it to flow one way forever. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, go on.
No.
Thought somebody was going to say something. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think valid points. Flowing in one direction versus backwards, I think opens up additional like discussion we need to do on the cryptographic like incentive side of things. It also I think raises the general question of like if we even want to change what it means to qualify to be a notary and how to like continue like being a notary over time. Like I know people have tossed around ideas of like staking or like incentivization of like notary, like good notary decision making behavior and stuff like that. And so I think it's certainly worth exploring that stuff. I don't know what a good format is to do that. Maybe what we need to do is like have a governance call where it's just like open brainstorm on like some of these topics, and we like give people a chance to think and plan their opinions for like a week and show up and talk through them or something. Because what ends up happening is I think we end up spending this time like bringing up stuff we should talk about, and then we don't really talk about it as much because their expectation is we will do it on like GitHub, and I think the engagement there tends to be lower than in the calls. And so either we need to encourage more people to use GitHub better, or we just need to restructure some of these calls maybe to have enough time to have like those harder conversations. I know we've also talked about like creating focus groups for work, like guild-esque groups like within our own like community, dividing us up into like problem areas and sending people off to conquer those problem areas. And it might be a good chance to experiment with that as well. Just as a general aside, I guess. I see Charles is unmuted. Charles, what's up? Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just like about transfer data cap part, like I'm kind of support because our system also has this issue. Not really issues, like we have data cap, but some user have their own, like because our project is like IPFS NFT transfer, right? And we provide something like a FS3, so they can build their own FS3 instance, but they can use in the bot system. So then it becomes issues like how can we enable our user to do it by them own instead of rely on us. So I just say like I'm supporting the transfer data part. For the remove verified client, I don't have much idea about it, honestly, because there are lots of reasons people don't use the format. Like us, like we get about 50 terabytes, 50 terabytes, but we're only using 5 terabytes at the moment. Main reason that we want to have some hardware issue at the moment. We need to figure it out when become something else be slow. And yeah, so I think we can give them a little bit longer time to see like what's happening. But yes, if they still not using it, for example, keep at 0, it's necessary to start some kind of investigation to asking them why you don't use it, right? And we also noticed that about the I'm pretty busy recently, but yesterday I spent some time go through some applications and noticed that some applications is in due diligence. And yeah, one common thing is some projects like this is that they are doing this one, but we don't really know that do they own the data or they also right to use this data, something we don't really know. So even though they give proof, but there's no directly relationship between the party owns the data and authorize the data. We need something like this to know, like, all right, some scenario public data set is fine, but some of them not really public data. It's more like a company has this data, but we don't know if it's okay for them to publish. So that's just some thoughts.
All good points. Well, I think commenting on either or both the FIP or the discussion topic in our notary governance, and we'll drive some conversation around those two. With the sort of 7 minutes that we have, just going to see if there were other open discussion topics that people wanted to bring up.
I think there's a data DAO discussion in previous GitHub or somewhere. I say there's a data DAO. What's going with that? Or not really data DAO, it's just a DAO, DAO discussion.
Yeah, I think the there's a difference between like the data DAO and then in general, like I think Filecoin Plus as in general, like learning and restructuring itself in a way that would make more sense to function like that. Basically, Charles, it's just like how in general, sort of moving towards notaries being like, as we've talked about, right? Like more like guardians or watch people rather than gatekeepers. And so borrowing some concepts from like what it would be like to run as a DAO, where like the actual notary role is more focused on policy setting and like creating rules and frameworks and organizational structure, and then the execution happens with software. So like giving, for example, like if we were to do the LDN process, it's already like a step in that direction where a lot of it is starting to be automated, but the notaries still sign allocations on chain. But ideally in the future, notaries could create standards that clients have to comply with, and like bots could just do the execution on chain for them, right? So there's definitely like it's mostly in that direction where it's like, oh, how do we like take lessons from what we know about like how DAOs work and stuff and apply them in a way that would be productive here. There's separate conversations that I know Andrew and JV and others have talked about, where like how do we create a concept of like a data DAO in Filecoin? What would that look like? What would it mean? And in some ways, I think it's very similar to what we're talking about and could be the same. And in other ways, I think it's also different and kind of a different scope. So I don't actually know what the latest has been on that. Maybe Andrew can shed some light, or maybe it is the conversations we're happening here that are sort of shaping that. I don't know.
Sorry, repeat the question.
Question from Charles is basically like, he's heard the term data DAO.
Oh yeah.
And was wondering like what that actually meant or what was happening on that front. And basically I was just saying that like we've been talking about like Filecoin Plus as a DAO, which is in some ways like depending on who you ask, that it's the same topic of conversation or it's a completely different scope. And so I don't know if you've still been having conversations on that front and in what way they might differ from what we're thinking about.
No, I haven't heard much progress there. I think a lot of it seems to be hinging on the FVM work. The idea that those things would live more natively on the Filecoin blockchain. So I don't know, I think it would be worthwhile as a community to do more experiments here. I think I've mentioned this in the past of like even creating a mock DAO on Ethereum where we use Snapshot to handle proposals. The challenge there is just like notaries would need to maintain both their Filecoin key and their Ethereum keys, and we need to do some mapping, but you know, not crazy, and it would allow us to already be seeing how that works. Like, I feel like you guys do an amazing job here keeping Phil Plus moving forward, but it's clearly still a Protocol Labs project. You know, it's kind of, I think it's a little hard for you to get us all to take over some of the work that you have to do day to day to keep this moving forward. Where if we were experimenting with some of those things now, maybe people could jump into taking on more tasks of like keeping infrastructure running, getting new interfaces built, all those things, where maybe it's like a little hindered now because we're not quite there. So that's where experimentation early might be helpful, but I think a lot of it will be blocked by that FVM and the landing. That's just editorial on that.
Yeah. I think Galen wants you to acknowledge the fact that him and Kere both are at the foundation, and so they now outnumber me as the sole PL.
Yes, I would like
Sorry.
the record to show for YouTube and all those watching that this meeting is being run, managed and hosted by the Filecoin Foundation and the Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web.
I misspoke there. I totally misspoke there. Yeah, I know you guys do most of it now. I kind of meant this core cohort.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, sorry. I do want to say that like the rest of what you said is totally fair, right? Which is like how do we experiment in time such that when the FVM shows up, we're able to leverage it, or we're able to figure out how we want to structure stuff.
You know, I feel like, well, I just even add more to that. Like, I feel like when I have problems, I go and complain to Galen, or I like ping Galen to help me find the right people to unblock that, which is like, I mean, Galen, you do awesome. I appreciate all of that work, But I feel like some of that could be shouldered more by other people in the community if we were to experiment more. But
Yeah, and
that's,
is that like
said, it's
a,
early days. So like
yeah,
the FVM
is that
maybe
an
has,
organizational structure problem or is that a incentivization problem?
I feel like have you ever heard of Conway's Law? Conway's Law, it basically says the way you write code will mirror the organization of your code will mirror the way your organization is. And so I feel like when you look at Phil Plus, it's a bit, you can kind of see that playing out. So you can, if you don't know the shape of the organization, you could also look at the shape of the code and infer what the shape of the organization is a bit. So yeah, it's just something, just an insight there.
I think that this echoes some of the things that I've heard, you know, from Faye as well at other times, that, you know, sometimes the number of notaries that we have, or like the speed with which they reply, or the amount that each notary is taking on, that kind of where we are at this early stage, there's still a few people doing a lot of lift, and wondering how do we scale that by not just adding more people to the mix, but also like what are the, you know, in typical organizations, we have this flow of like people, process, programs. First, you just have to throw more people at a problem to solve it. Then you can start building better processes around it. Then you can start building better programs. And I think there's sort of this idea of like, are we at the point where we need to start experimenting more with programmatic changes, like various DAO structures, so that as we add more people, that program can scale up with it, rather than just saying, what does it look like to do everything the same way, but with 50 notaries, but with 100 notaries?
Yeah, so I have a couple questions on my mind, just like open-ended questions to give you kind of where I'm coming from. It's like, so I participate in some other DAOs and kind of mostly lurking, but a member trying to follow how these things are unfolding. And when I look at Phil Plus, I think there's a ton of opportunities. And so some questions that I have. Are there roles that aren't notaries that should be here? So people that are enthusiastic about the network that would be collaborating with us to make this move forward? My answer is yes. So how do we get them in here? Another question I have, if the Phil Plus team community here is dedicated to distributing this data cap and getting clients onboarded, do we have a business development function? And do we have business development people on this group, like on this call, helping us think how we get this distributed? I haven't seen it emerge yet. And I know there's business development people on lots of different orgs in the community. Can we bring them in the fold so we can create a strategy for getting high quality client? Like, and I feel like in a DAO, those ideas start as a document, as a proposal in Notion, and then we start like snowballing, and people actually are, oh, that's my passion area, I'll do that, and take the lead and go do it. And there's a little bit of that we're like a little log jammed and kind of doing, and kind of just getting the pieces all in place, but that organizational stuff isn't quite sorted out yet. So it's not allowing that sort of flourishing of parallel ideas and experimentation. Like every DAO I know has like a membership team, and their like job is to help new people on board and give them tasks and get them. So that idea of like, what could other people be doing here? We don't really have that function. So nobody's out there trying to find the Filecoin enthusiast and saying, hey, you should be part of this Phil Plus thing because it's more than just data cap. It's like business development, it's ecosystem growth, it's like high quality data, it's like all these really cool things, telling stories, like, and we're really focused still on data cap deployment. So just because we're like there. So yeah, just some more stream of consciousness for you all.
Yeah, but I think that part is currently leading by the working group. The working group is doing lots of business integration, getting data, client on data onboarding, and it's not limited just the data cap. It's included the Gravity project, which is unencrypted data with the incentives to encourage them doing more. So that's part of, but sometimes, yes, that's cross connections, because data cap is also a way to encourage people to save useful data, while the Gravity project is for more business data. So working group will take a lot of responsibility at the moment, building the business cases. But Notary for sure can perform more because Notary can, just like a name plus, right? It's a plus to give them more power. Yeah, I think it's a good conversation. Fortunately, like I'm also part of the working group, so know that there are storage providers in different places. But for now, working group is more related to the storage provider, while Notary is more working with data clients. So I think if we can have both together, it will be a good scenario to working to figure out something interesting.
Very helpful, very useful. Thank you both. I know we're a little over time. I'm gonna do a little bit of thinking and probably share some additional ideas and prompts at the call this afternoon, which will of course be recorded, and then take it from there. Anything else anybody wants to add? Okay.
This is great.
Have a
Great
great
discussion.
rest of your day. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks, everybody.
bye.
All right. Tuesday, November 9th, 4 p.m. in California. Second one of these today, jumping swiftly in. Agenda, same as usual. We've got some metrics to go over, some program updates, and then flagging a couple of issues that have popped up that are mostly resolved at this point. Going over some reminders about the large data set process, and then time for some open discussion, including some discussion of some FIPS that are going to potentially have impact on Filecoin Plus, to share and hear more about those. But before we do, we'll introduce K-Ray back to the team. For the notaries on the call, I'll pass the mic over to K-Ray to introduce himself.
Very warm hello. I've been with PL previously. Now I'm joining the foundation. I'm a little bit familiar with what we're doing here on the program. I think if I had to summarize what I'll be doing is helping making this just supported. I'll be taking feedback from you, seeing how we can make the program better, what ways we can just make this as low lift as possible while giving you a voice and just someone that you can reach out to for support. So look forward to learning more and diving in over the couple of days and weeks. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks, K-Ray. Stoked. Similarly stoked about some of our current metrics that we're seeing. Specifically, we have recalculated average time to data cap once we found some outliers that were incorrectly changing the metrics, and we're seeing 2 days, but even better than that, across the past 30 days, we're seeing 1 day and 16 hours. So a little bit better. We want to keep driving those down from a client experience, just to get that first amount of data cap to them, so they can start making some deals, and we can learn more about that. We're also seeing the overall average time for direct notary involvement at 11 days, with the past 30 days hovering closer to 9. So still improvements, which are great, and we want to keep increasing. One area where we think we could have some impact is around this time to first response, thinking about, ways that we can notify notaries better, so that there's a clearer, faster, easier action on their part, things like that. Also looking at our data cap, volumetric flow, the funnel. We're seeing 2 PEBs going to clients, which is a decent amount from the notaries out to clients, and of that, about a third is getting to storage providers and deals. Pretty good. Then looking at our LDNs, slightly different because this is calculated by looking at that top large data set pool. We're seeing about 3.3 petabytes to clients, with 800 petabytes making its way to deals. So the percentages are a little bit more, skewed and harder to rely on, but the values themselves give us a pretty good picture and inspire some confidence. gonna pass it to Deep to talk about the direct notary activity here, and then some program updates.
Sweet. Just sharing the table that we aggregate with Textile's help with the auto-generated script. We actually, in the morning session today, spent some time chatting about how to make some upgrades to this, as well as like educating ourselves and the community on how to update this table so that moving forward, it continues to be an actively updated, accurate source of data. Just to catch you folks up, for those that couldn't make it to the morning conversation, there's actually a JSON registry of all current active notaries that exists that drives the back end of the actual app that sits between like plus.fil.org and GitHub, and the different bots that need to do operations between GitHub and the app. And so consolidating that JSON with this particular like table is probably a good next step in ensuring that we have consistent tracking of notaries across the board. And so that's a good action item from here. No major changes from the last time this slide was presented 2 weeks ago. Trends are generally similar. Activity is generally similar. Nothing really to call out on this front. Cool. And as you folks know, we've been tracking towards these end of Q1, which I swear eventually we're going to update the slide goals that we've been talking about for about a month and a half now at this stage. The main things I want to call out are that spend some time doing the math a little bit more accurately for the total amount of data cap that's been made available to clients. So the way that was done, if you want to replicate this or check this for yourself, is basically in the large data sets notary repo, there's a label called state granted that reflects every large data set application that has received some data cap and is currently not waiting for more. So received some and used less than 75% of their allocation. And then if you put the label for awaiting due diligence, I believe, or is it needs? I think it's like needs signing or something. Hold on, let me just double check.
Ready to sign.
Ready to sign. That's the exact.
Bot,
Thank you,
ready to sign.
Nice. So when it says bot ready to sign, that implies that it's time for notaries to do due diligence and sign the applications. However, that would be the same label, at least right now, with the structure that exists, whether or not that client has never received data cap or is receiving like a nth tranche of that same data cap from the LDN that was approved. And so I summed up manually just the ones that are granted and then the ones that are ready to sign but have previously received data cap. I think that was just around 75 PB. And then, of course, as we know, like manual allocations are in the magnitude of about 8 PB. This is pretty cool, actually, because as we called out in the morning, 2 months ago, this program was like hovering at like 30 PB, 40 PB, and then a month or two before that, it was like in the tens. So it's like tremendous progress in terms of like clients that are actually being approved to receive data cap via this path. And now hopefully, we can continue to work together as a community to improve that experience, unblock them more for their consequent allocations. One thing I've been meaning to introduce here is a metric that I refer to as DWD. I mentioned this in one of the past governance calls, but the idea that we should start thinking about like days without data cap. Like, what does it mean for a client that actually gets blocked because they're waiting for the next set of data cap to be made available to them? So we should start thinking about access to software, tooling, tools to augment decision-making that would ensure that stays low for clients that we believe are good actors in the system. And then, of course, for ones that are not, then formalizing that process, empowering notaries to feel like they can actually ask questions of clients and actually like do due diligence and consequences of utilizing data cap in the network in the future. I know Galen's going to touch on this a little bit further later on, so I won't get too deep into it right now, but in general, prompt for notaries here and watching this recording to continue thinking about software or tooling that could be built to augment that due diligence process, mostly to make it more efficient. So not in the interest of like any compromises in the quality of due diligence, but rather in the interest of making it lower friction. So like shaving off a few minutes or giving you like one-click access to the data that you need rather than like 5 clicks or 10 clicks to ensure that your experience is good, increasing the likelihood that you'll do the due diligence that you think is necessary, but then also reduce your overall time commitment to still continue serving at a standard that you believe is correct. That note, talking about time to data cap, no significant change from 2 weeks ago on this front, other than, we've consistently talked about increasing the amount of allocation being given through like automated notaries. So I think next steps here are probably to transition that discussion to like an actual proposal, and then follow up with verify.glyph.io to see if they're interested in doing that, or if a different notary might want to take that stead. But in general, it seems like the community is pretty supportive of doing that, even sticking to the current like KYC-based mechanisms of GitHub. And in the future, we can continue to explore more efficient things. Cool. On the next slide, the 3 other themes, no significant changes on these. I just want to still highlight the focus areas though, because I think that they're interesting prompts for notaries to continue doing thinking, ideation, creative sort of brainstorming in these calls or on your own or in GitHub and Slack. And these focus areas are meant more as like a mental model or a framework of areas that as a community we can default to prioritizing and use as a framework for how we choose to divide up the work that we have in front of us and then prioritize it. So these areas of risk mitigation, which is generally like things we want to do in the community to make sure our eyes are wide open about what's actually happening. Client onboarding UX, so generally like what it actually means for a client to onboard through the app or through GitHub and how we can improve that to make a very, very low friction experience for them. And then of course, the Filecoin Plus governance side of things, which is how we want to improve and mature our own practices and make ourselves more easily held accountable, but also in general feel more empowered to make a difference to this program that we're all contributing to. General shout out, I mean, we just celebrated 1 year anniversary of mainnet, which is also 1 year anniversary of Filecoin Plus. When we're talking about software that needs to exist for 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years, it's very, very small on the scale of the long-term horizon. And so I think we've got a long way to go. We've already made great progress together, but certainly got plenty of time to continue experimenting, iterating, and improving our processes. Yeah, unless there are any immediate questions on this, I'd say back to Galen and let's continue.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Deep, for those updates. Jumping in, calling attention to a bug issue that some people were facing and ran into last week around the remaining data cap. So there was most of you are aware, there was a network update. This had some cascading impact where various nodes may or may not have been updated in time and some different endpoints changed. So what this led to is our interplanetary dashboard, the value specifically around data cap remaining was incorrect. So other pieces of information on that dashboard were still accurate. It was just this one. That affected the subsequent allocation bot because it would look to that calculation to see should it kick off the next allocation request. So at this point in time, actually both of these things have been fixed. So last week, the bot was corrected by pointing to a different endpoint. So now that subsequent allocation bot is successfully pulling data cap remaining and kicking off those allocations correctly. As well, when I just checked before this call, our interplanetary dashboard values are correct. You will see some places where there is a notary listed with 0 petabytes of data cap remaining. Those are situations where that specific notary address has been deprecated for one reason or another. Some of them are notaries that are not participating in this election cycle, but most of them are from large data sets that were on the previous V1 process that have now been removed of data cap and deprecated. We're working on updating the names. But for example, LDN number 1, that multi-sig notary that had 7 signers is no longer an active notary. So we've removed that data cap and removed them from the registry. So you'll still see some zeros. Those are accurate. Jumping into some large data set process reminders. So we've had a number of questions from different notaries over the past few weeks. We've also seen, just a lot of new applications. I think we're somewhere at 45 or 46 open client, large data set applications, which is great. So the flow, the way that it works, a client will submit the application. The governance team and some bots will only check for basic completion, which means, are all of the questions answered? Is this a duplicate submission? That sort of very outstanding flag. Once those have been resolved, the governance team works with the root key holders to create the multisig with all of the existing notaries as signers and a threshold of 2. So these multisigs have about 23 signers on them and a threshold of 2. We give them the amount of data cap, they get added to the verified registry. Once that is complete, the bot goes in and kicks off that first allocation and changes the labels on the GitHub issue so that it shows up in the app. All of these steps are happening in preparation for the notaries. And we're now tracking all of these steps for the timing so that we can start publishing details on the timing. But this is also that the multisig itself can be created and ready with data cap so that once the notaries have reviewed it, the allocations can start rolling through. I see a hand from Meg, so I'm going to pause.
Cool, thanks. My question just is about the app. So when I go in there and I see a whole list, pages of MDNs that need, in here, need verifying. How this has changed a bit. So just tell me, are we driving off this list? I'm looking at both. I'm using your issues list in GitHub, which I'm finding quite useful, actually. It's telling me what's coming up. But on this list, there's zeros and ones. So I'm assuming, I'm going to pause. I'll let you direct me.
Yep.
What
So
should I be looking for and how should I use it?
So these are the steps that the governance team takes. And then the next steps are for the notaries. So now we get into what are the steps for the notary diligence and signing. So the notaries can start either at the app or in GitHub. If you go to GitHub, you can search for this label, bot ready to sign, and you will then see the same thing that's populating here. I think it right now is at 18 because I think one of these cleared from when I took this snapshot, but there's about 18 large data sets that are ready to start getting allocations. So you could start at either of those places. You will then have the issue or the audit trail, and you can review the client application itself. You can ask questions like, is this a real client? Is this real data? Is the amount of data cap that they're requesting appropriate based on what I think they are saying they will need? And if this is a subsequent allocation, is there any past deal-making behavior that I deem questionable or suspicious, such as a violation of their application terms? Did they claim they would perform a certain type of deal-making distribution, but instead we're seeing something else? We can then ask all those questions directly in the issue and flag them in that GitHub issue. Or if you don't have questions, you can sign the allocation in the app. You could also sign the allocation and acknowledge that the question that you have shouldn't be a blocker and say, like, I was curious about this, I went ahead and signed it, but I would love to hear more about your answer to this question. You can do that. If you think that your question should prevent people from signing it, then you can tag myself and Deep, and we try and stay on top of these comments, and we'll remove the labels to pause the allocations until we get sufficient evidence from the client. Now, another note here about this process that is a agreed process, but not a hard-coded rule, is we don't want a notary to sign 2 allocations for the same client in a row. So if Internet Archive comes up for an allocation and, you know, Meg and Danny sign for Internet Archive, and then a week goes by and Internet Archive is ready for their next allocation, the bot tells who signed the first one. And ideally, Meg and Danny don't sign Internet Archive's second allocation. We let two other notaries jump in, do some diligence, see it, spread that out. And then when the third allocation comes through, Meg and Danny could absolutely jump in again. So we just kind of want to have a little bit of a rotation back and forth. Before we take questions, like this is, as Meg was saying, this is what you're seeing. There's 18 or 19 open, ready to receive, and the approval counts are ones where, for this one, no one has yet signed it. I want to flag some different notes here so that we're all on the same page. On the previous process, there was this concept of a lead notary. This is no longer the case on this LDN version 2.0. That was when we had only 7 notaries with a threshold of 4. We asked one notary to step up and be the lead before creating that multi-sig. We've gotten rid of that kind of programmatic expectation and role, and now all of the notaries are responsible for all of the open large data sets. If you as a notary feel very, very strongly about one, absolutely you could help shepherd that client through and go help empower other notaries to jump in. You may sign the first allocation because it's a project you really know and love, and then when the second one comes in, you may go champion in some of our channels and say, hey, I signed this first one, can someone please jump in? And you can call some people out. It's fine for the notaries to do that and advocate, but there is no lead notary anymore. The other thing to note, before the process was 7 signers with a threshold of 4, it is now 23 signers with a threshold of 2. And that means 1 proposal transaction and then 1 approval on that transaction ID. And then the message clears and they receive the allocation, they receive the data cap. What we have seen happen is we may get 3 messages back to back from 3 different notaries quickly in a row. This may happen because there's currently an issue where the bot doesn't always remove the label, so it still shows up in the app. Or if the notaries are jumping in quick succession and signing at the same time. Someone posts that they're really running low, 3 notaries jump in to sign it. What could happen is the first notary proposes, the second notary approves, that message, that transaction ID has cleared. The third notary still sees it in the app and sends another message. That starts a new proposal transaction for that amount of data cap. And what we've seen is we may then have that transaction floating. We pull the label, that transaction is still there. When they start to run out of data cap and we put the label back on and it shows up in the app again, it's going to have an approval count already of 1, and it's pending that second signature. So this happened last week with textile, and we're working on ways to prevent this, but it's just something to call out that with a threshold of only 2, sometimes we're going to hit that threshold quickly while other people are still signing. Other things to note, because the message as you're using the app has to land on chain, it can take sometimes over 30 seconds because you have to wait for that block, that epoch, to land. So in that way, the app appears slow. We're working on better user experience signals to make it more clear that it's still running in the background, but it's not as instantaneous as we may have become used to with technology, because it won't post an approval or a failure until it has landed on chain. We're still better than some other blockchains, just not throwing any shade. So some things that you as a notary could do is you could open the console in your browser to watch this and watch for the messages as they cascade through the console. You could also check and refresh the GitHub issue, which once that message lands will be posted in the GitHub issue. Last thing to note, we are aware that our documentation is out of date. This has been a work in progress for a while. We just haven't had the time to sufficiently prioritize it. We would be happy to crowdsource some of this and get some PRs in GitHub. This kind of falls into one of our client onboarding UX goals. So it is something that we're aware of. And we understand it's not ideal. It's on the roadmap. to have better documentation. So pausing there, I see some questions in the chat. One client can only apply one time before their data cap is used up. So what we're seeing from some people is a client is applying for a data set, and they have two data sets that they are bringing to the network. So the client is representing two different data sets, and they have two different large data set applications. And those are running concurrently because they are for a specific set of data that they're getting approved. This just helps, it helps them manage their process. It helps the application be more clear as to what it is and who they're storing it with. So it just creates that separation. So a client is able to, within reason, have multiple applications open based on why they might need that. The other question, they met with no response after approval and tried to review again. Bingy, can you clarify some more of what you mean with your comment?
Sorry, was that question for me?
No, that was for Bingy, but we may have lost them. But Meg, also to your point, one of the other things that we can do is you can reload like Filefox to also look to see if the messages have landed. So if you are looking at the F080 address on Filefox, you'll see if a message is a proposal, what the transaction ID is, that sort of thing. So there's a couple ways to look.
Right, yeah, I just look, it just sort of feels some of them are so they're different each time, and I don't really know what to do. And textile was a really good example. Like I'm aware I shouldn't have signed that again, but I had the time zone advantage because I was up and everyone else might have been sleeping, and then it seemed urgent. But I nearly gave up after the second attempt, but I had one more and then it worked. So it was like, it's perplexing and sometimes it puts me off.
Yeah. No, I mean, it does the same thing for the root key holders. We've heard it from notaries for direct allocations too. So I'd just say the biggest advice as with lots of this technology is like, once you've hit it, wait a little bit, come back in a few minutes and refresh and see if it has, if the status has changed. But
no problems. All right. And then you just want us to report any error messages that we can't resolve in the issue, right?
Yeah. You can flag them in the issue. You can flag them in Slack. Those are both good places, and other notaries can jump in and sort of see and help support. Okay, so it sounds like when you say after the hardware wallet is used for approval, are you saying you're not using the app? You're using, or are you using a ledger through the app to approve the message? Because I think this is a similar thing to what Meg is saying, is that sometimes when you approve a message, it doesn't look like it worked, but there's no clear indication. Well, we are working on better UX tooling to try and make this more clear when it is running in the background, when it has failed, when it is successful. So if we we'll keep you guys updated as we make improvements on that. Pausing here and seeing, Deep, did you want to touch on any of these, or should we jump into the FIP discussions?
Yeah, I think we should jump into the FIP. The only thing worth is here that as I called it earlier, the automated verification one. I think I'm going to file an issue for the proceed towards implementation. Cool. FIP time. Shall we talk about the FIP? Do you want to do a quick intro, or shall I?
I'm getting the screen pulled up.
Sweet.
Here we go. The more data cap ownership management posted 9 hours ago related to this FIP. I'm going to drop these in the chat. So there's the issue on our page, and here's the FIP itself. And we also have here with us Caitlin from the Foundation TPN for Governance, who can also sort of address these and answer questions that come up kind of about the FIP itself or about the FIP process. So Deep, did you want to talk through this FIP itself?
Sure can, yeah. I think the main thing is that today, like data cap itself is a very like static resource that doesn't actually have that much ability to be changed or messed with once it gets to a client. Like it's much easier to give somebody notary status or remove their data cap, but once it gets to a client, there's nothing to be done about it. And so this FIP is sort of a set of attempting to solve at least two types of problems. One where if a client address no longer is the right address for that client, like can we move that data cap over to a different address? And then there's in the case that the client no longer should have data cap, how do we remove their status as a verified client? So talking about these in their two different sort of use cases, I like to think of them as sort of separate, and maybe we should think about like each of these as a separate FIP. But the second one, I think, is a less controversial one for our community. Like we've been talking about this on and off for several months now, where we've talked about like one, a mechanism whereby in some way the community can decide that if a client is not a well-acting client, then they shouldn't have access to this resource, right? So what does it mean to actually strip them of existing data cap that could lead them to create deals that enable further abuse of the system? Or two, we've also talked about data cap sitting latent with clients for extremely large amounts of time. Like what happens if a client or a notary doesn't actually give any data cap out for like months or years? Is there a concept of like revoking or returning that so that there's still like the data cap that is going out is being like useful when it's going out? And then the second, which is effectively like there's this idea that like client addresses change over time, either because they lose access to them or because they decide that they're going to make deals in a different way. So the example that was given in this FIP is basically if a client decides that they're going to go via a deal broker instead of via their own address, then maybe they can transfer that data cap to a broker. And maybe that should be an option that we provide. And if so, then who has the rights to actually move that data cap around? So I think in general, I can do a quick recap of the conversation in the morning, and then we can take it from there. Or no, you'd rather have the unbiased conversation? Okay, that sounds good. I see Gillen. Okay, that sounds good. So then I'm just going to stop talking now because I already have some opinions, and instead of sharing them, I'd like to hear what people in the room think. Thank you, sir. I guess this is Meg, the notary from Bing Her and XN Matrix. What are your thoughts on this before we give you any of our thoughts on this?
I'm just reading it. Do you want us to read it now or and comment later?
Actually, if you have a minute to scan through it now, it might be good to just chat because we do have some time left in the session. It might be good to do some of it live if possible. maybe we'll just give a minute of silence because it looks like a couple others in the chat are still reading. We can all watch Galen make some entertaining faces in the meantime. Hello, YouTube.
That's probably going to be like really distracting for people that are trying to read, though. I'm gonna stop.
Well, it seems reasonable to me, guys. And it's probably just going to have some controls in there that, you know, some of the comments. I guess your open questions, you know, good questions. The second point, I mean, this is where we need a bit of UX, right? So rather than just removing or revoking an inactive client, is like just reach out to them. Why aren't they using it? And the same with the expiry on the data cap. Like, why can't we ask what they need? And should someone not be using it, then it expires.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part of what you said, Meg. Do you mind repeating that?
Well, I'm actually just saying we don't need to guess. We can ask the client. So this is the UX side of things. If there's let's agree the expiry up front, and if they're not using it, then let's find out why.
Yeah. And just provide them the support that they need to like be able to use it. Yeah. Yeah, I think our like data cap utilization once given to clients is what, hovering around 30%, I want to say. Which is pretty good, but should be a lot better, especially if we're like doing automatic subsequent allocation releases at 75%. So I would expect that number to be higher there. In the chat, I support that remove inactive verified clients would be nice to avoid future market manipulation. A cautious attitude should be maintained regarding data cap transfers. Yeah, that makes sense. Meg, you were going to say something?
Yeah, there was some talk about a customer success or, you know, client support that can work with those that have the data cap just to oversee this on your side. Did that happen? Is that a role that you think is worthy?
So the foundation has brought in one solutions architect so far, and there's talk of bringing in some additional support on that, and the ecosystem working group sort of umbrella to effectively help bridge the gap between clients and storage providers, which would, an ideal applicant pool of clients would be ones that have already been verified. So that sort of gets at that point of like, if we have clients with data cap and they're not making deals for some reason, or they're claiming to have friction making deals in a certain way, could we invest manpower resources at helping to unblock that? So we do have one solutions architect, and we are looking to grow that experience.
Okay.
Cool. I think we got opinions from.
Yeah, I wanted to give Caitlin a chance. Well, it's we'll just let Caitlin share directly her comment.
Yeah. It's really helpful to have this sort of targeted audience who have sort of very hands-on use cases for the potential impact of these types of proposals. So if you have opinions, even if it's just to say yay or nay, it would be really helpful if you could add those directly to the thread in GitHub. That way, Jenny, as the FIP author, can see that this is something that potential Filecoin Plus participants and notaries support or have issue with. And I think also the comment about Research should be done to check if the onboarding process is fluent. Again, those kinds of things, we can only open issues if they're captured. And unfortunately, we do lose the chat record after we close this meeting. So please make your opinions known and documented, and that would be great.
Yes, and also as Caitlin said, like Deep and I are not the original authors of this issue. So while it is a FIP that relates to the Filecoin Plus program, there are other people submitting these. So we hesitate to speak on behalf of someone from this call on this issue. So encouraging you guys. Thank you again for the comments here and jumping in. Looking forward to starting to synthesize some of those. And thanks, Caitlin. While we have you, I think one of the outstanding questions that Deep raised, and this is more of a process question, what would it look like to split this into 2 FIPs? Is that easy? Is that, you know, just a process thing of opening another FIP and reframing this one? Can you approve only one part of a FIP? What does that look like from that side?
Yeah, this is a really great question. So you can only approve a FIP in entirety. This is what we saw previously if anybody was involved in the decision to extend the fault sector period from 2 to 6 weeks. A FIP had effectively been pushed to the repo that had a lot of different components to it. Some were technically complex and some were a little bit more controversial for different stakeholders within the Filecoin ecosystem. One of the things we had to do was boil that down to only one succinct proposal, because it was the only way that we could properly measure feedback and acceptance criteria. So for this, it is helpful again to have this feedback captured, specifically to know, you know, if you support this measure as it currently is written, that's great. If you have, you know, general support for the transfer data cap idea, but perhaps outstanding questions for remove verified client, making these questions and caveats known is the only way we know whether or not we do have to actually split a FIP into 2. But the process of doing that is really simple and straightforward. And Jenny could quite quickly go and just create a second issue, and we could capture feedback on these as separate topics for consideration.
Amazing. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
There is
actually.
phenomenal explanation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, process questions for FIPs are what I'm here for. We're actually going to be rolling out a new process in the coming weeks that I hope makes this a lot clearer for everyone. And I'll actually add this question about should we split a FIP to our FAQ section on our discussion forum. I don't want to open a can of worms. I know we only have a few minutes left in this meeting, but there is actually a second Filecoin Plus FIP topic that was opened. I flagged this for you very quickly. And I will share it in the chat as well.
Yes.
This is one that was written by someone who is not, to my knowledge, involved in the Filecoin Plus project. This is a storage provider, but I don't believe he has ever worked directly with notaries. I could be wrong.
I think they recently opened a large data set application.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, so they may just, you know, be upset about how long it takes, even though, again, the rate of approval has been increasing and improving. I think there's also some misinterpretations about the program and what it's supposed to provide for the network. So I'll hold back my opinions on this proposal generally, since I'm supposed to just be a steward of the process. But I did want to flag this because I think there are some points of guidance that notaries themselves could add on this to help clarify sort of the purpose of the notary process, and as well as the improvements that have been logged in the recent weeks. Yeah, again, the only way we are able to actually like capture this feedback is on the thread directly, for good or bad. So if you read through this and you're saying, wait a minute, that misinterprets what we're doing, or this seems to discount some of the improvements we made, or misunderstands the purpose of Filecoin Plus, I think a lot of that guidance is missing on this post, and it would be helpful to have as well. Or maybe you agree. That's obviously valid too. So did want to call attention to it while I have the attention of folks who know Filecoin Plus the best.
Yeah. Spicier one, much spicier.
Every once in a while we get some spicy FIPs. It's always interesting to see where they go. So
Yeah, well, FIPS backwards is SPIFE.
Spiff.
Sorry,
Yeah.
trying to get, that was a reach. Yes, here's their application submitted 6 days ago, right after submitting this one.
Yeah, so I mean, separately for the notary that may be looking at this application, or maybe interested in reviewing it, I believe this person does participate in the storage provider working groups. So they are relatively accessible and they're always on Slack. So it should be pretty easy to speak with them if that's of interest. I'm not going to pry into the notaries and processes, but yeah, there's obviously some bias to this post, and the point of FIPS is to contribute like improvements to the network. So again, it's helpful to capture alternative perspectives, since there's also some like just obviously like some more normative perspectives here that I don't think capture everyone's point of view. So
Yeah, good question. When you say like engage on Slack and stuff, the best practice here is still to respond in GitHub though, right? To capture the discussion.
oh yeah, it is. Sorry, I was saying if you wanted to talk to Fatman13 in particular about his LDN application, but or his his application. You could contact him. He's pretty active in Filecoin Slack, but you're right, Deep, for FIPS themselves. The most important thing is that we have this comments and feedback for specific items on the thread itself, since that's what we use to gauge the FIP and where it is in the FIP process. So we're not going to steward a FIP through a security audit or a crypto econ audit if there's no feedback on it, for example. Likewise, if a FIP represents someone's own perspective or frustrations, which I suspect this one might, but it doesn't actually have support from the broader community, it's much easier for us to sort of close that issue and provide some redirection or alternative solutions for this person. If we have alternative community members coming in and saying that this isn't something that they agree with relatively early on. So yeah, TLDR,
Awesome.
always add your comments on GitHub.
Awesome. So 2 good FIPS homework for people to check out, as well as about 18 open large data sets. So a lot of action in the community, on top of the what did we say? Sorry, let me scroll back up here. About 19 new apps in the last week and 36 open direct applications. So lots of people trying to get into that data cap world. Looking forward to hearing from others. We've got about 6 more minutes if there were either questions or comments about those FIPS, about anything else we've covered. So we'll just happy to hear from the room.
Also, I'm going to go ahead and drop links to both of these open FIP items in the, I guess, the Phil Plus channel. Is that broadly open, or where could I share these so folks can find them after the call?
Yeah, Phil Plus is a very, very large channel. Could absolutely drop both of them and say, 2 new FIPS.
Guys, the only comment I had was I just picked up some of the thread from Andrew from, it must have been this morning's call. How are we going to progress some of the things that are still open and outstanding?
So we briefly talked about this last governance call, I think, where we thought about structuring the notary working group into smaller like focus groups, Meg. I don't know if you remember this, and then sort of enabling them to push forward kind of thing. I think for that to effectively happen, a little bit more like organizational work and planning needs to happen. to like set up the community to do that. So there's an action item from today morning's call, which was like, hey, can we do a little bit more on like our end? Because right now, like Galen, Gary, and I end up doing a lot of like the operational overhead. Sort of opening that up a little bit more so we can share that better with people, involve them more in the operational processes, and then based on that, start once that like info or whatever resources are required to enable somebody participating in that become easier to access to all engaged members of the community, maybe we'd start defining roles to push some of these discussions to completion. I think that's like a reasonable next step, where like action item from that might be that like one of the upcoming governance calls we set aside for discussing and like driving to resolution or driving to proposal, basically for these open discussions or other topics that have come up, and then elect like individuals from the community who are interested in specifically solving those problems or like fleshing out the details of a proposal that they can bring back to the rest of the community that we can then ratify and put into practice.
Yeah. What's the short answer? Like defining the DAO and some of the things and moving on this.
Yeah, I think the short answer is basically one, let us do a little bit of homework on how we can be more transparent about what is required for operations so that we can start sharing that responsibility with others. And then two, let's plan an upcoming notary governance session, probably the next one, to just be focused on the discussion topics to drive towards like proposals or sets of working groups on proposals that can then follow up and build like details that are required before we ratify stuff. Not a very short answer, but shorter. I guess further TLDR would be, I think it's pretty crisp actually. Like next governance call, maybe specifically set it to like, figure out how we want to proceed with each of these, elect people that want to work on them, and then we have the burden to share more of the operational breakdown on the work that we do.
Okay.
Galen, is that reasonable? Does that sort of map to? Okay, cool. There's a question in the chat. We need to deal with the problem with clients' data cap applications and give more support. Follow-up visits to client are important. Bigger, do you mean in terms of when they receive data cap and don't make deals, or do you mean after they made deals and they want to continue getting more data cap? Or is it like before they've even gotten the data cap and they're just like writing an application that isn't getting approved? Which are you referring to?
Well, we are also running into time. I want to be mindful of everyone's schedule. Maybe if there's some other follow-up questions, could post them in the Phil Plus Notaries channel or in the broad Phil Plus channel, just as some extra places for follow-up. And we have those open discussions, could absolutely add another discussion topic if there's like a larger issue. But I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for those that need to go. And thanks for everybody's time.
Yeah, just see chat. Let's follow up on chat and Slack.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks.